Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Design Beyond Pixels. This is a series of podcasts that will allow design leaders across the US and Europe to discuss topics chosen by them. Today, I'm joined by Dane Howard. Dane, thanks so much for joining me today. Can you please just give us a short intro into yourself?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm Dane Howard. I'm currently the VP of Design at G2. I've had a rich history of being able to move my way through a career from IC all the way through design leadership, learning along the way. So glad to be here.
Cool. Thanks very much, Dane. Very much looking forward to this. In terms of what we're going to be doing today, this podcast is going to be a little bit different to perhaps some of the ones you've seen before, or certainly the one I did before. I'm giving full ownership to the guests to pick and choose which topics that they want to discuss today. Now, Dan, I know I gave you the task shortly before this, perhaps a little bit too shortly, but I know you've come up with the topics we're going to be discussing today. So could you just give a very quick overview of, some of the things that you want to discuss during today's podcast?
Yeah, so I think what's top of mind for me is just surfacing analogy that's been used in product design for a long time, which is the three-legged stool. I'd say it's very relevant when you've got squads that are allocated in an agile way that are starting to create balance. And for those that aren't familiar with the three-legged stool, it's a combination of balance, and you put the customer in the center of that stool, but it's usually supported by three primary functions: design, then product or business, and then engineering. And it's the balance between those legs of that stool as they work together to frame and find problems and solve together and collaboratively as you move software progress forward. So I think from the backdrop of what that means in a professional life, I had the chance to, over the last 2 years, and particularly as we all went through COVID, find my own three-legged stool. I thought it would be really relevant to share some of the findings and kind of encouragements of creating your own three-legged stool, not only to create balance in life, but balance for yourself as a creative and a leader.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I think look, it's a super relevant topic and super relevant space to be discussing. I think many design leaders would have been, through these things. I think there's potentially always some tension between the departments you mentioned there within product and engineering and design. But yeah, I think it would be great to obviously pick your brain a little bit during this talk to figure out a little bit more about how you've managed that and how you've managed to also find a balance with your career and obviously outside life as well. So yeah, give us start off by giving us some input into the three-legged stool. Something that you've managed to perhaps devise a little bit more of your own output on for now.
Well, I'll start with just acknowledging that when I speak to other design leaders, it's an all-consuming job. If you're leading an organization, you've got so much to contend with, and I think just to acknowledge that and say I have felt imbalance in my own life, and I have not been the ideal leader when I find myself imbalanced, and just to acknowledge that. And I sought out several different well-respected design leaders, and we created like a forum. We met like once a month,
Yeah.
and we started to talk about what we're seeing, what we're doing, and we were in different walks of life. And think of it as uh, like somewhat like how artists would get together. And it turned out that some of the other leaders that I was meeting with uh, also had this challenge of finding balance in their life. And they all had been at some point of their life extremely well respected and top of their game leaders. We're talking, leading huge design teams at Meta,
Yeah.
as well as Disney, as well as, Envision. And, I was just really interested in talking with them. And it turns out that they all so had practices of coaching and mentoring that they had stood up, and that they were talking about just what it meant to give back to this up and coming generation of designers. It might be that they weren't necessarily managing them at the time, but they found a new relationship with coaching. And I get into that a little bit.
Yeah.
And then the third aspect is that there was something creative or artistic with all of these different leaders. And so we found that just the commonality between us gave us the opportunity in the forum to speak monthly about what was working, what was not working, and what it meant to ourselves, and the importance of how balance in ourselves actually made us better leaders.
Yeah.
So I made a real intentional act in the beginning of 2023 to lean into that. And I had a chance to think about what would balance be and what would be my three-legged stool.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Look, I think I fully respect the focus group that you guys, made and came together weekly. So I think it's a great idea. I think, particularly burnout was a huge problem ever since COVID. I think it's become forever more evident, and I think people are a lot more aware of what it is and what causes that. And yeah, we've been through some crazy times over the last few years, especially, design as well. I think we've gone through a huge uprise in the need and rise of design across the board. I think, there was a huge boom for just sort of post COVID for design coming in. A lot more companies wanted to hire designers, but leaders were in a spot where they have probably seen vast amounts of growth over the last few years to now the opposite way, right? And I think, you guys are all human too. And it comes to a point where, you need to, you need them support, and building a support group at any level. It just goes to show, there's always, no matter what level you get to in design, in any aspect of life, there's always people that you can lean on and build support groups with, because you're all trying to achieve the same thing at the end of the day. But yeah, no, it's really interesting. You guys, obviously came together and built that focus group. So talk to me a little bit more about, the differences between balancing work and also balancing your personal life, and how, that positively affected things as well. And if it was anything you tried perhaps that didn't necessarily work out in the first place as well.
Yeah. So, you know, one thing I'll just, if you're listening to this and thinking about yourself, one way to maybe think about it is input and output, and then what I'll call sharpening the saw. And I think so much of the day job of being a leader inside an organization or running projects can take a lot from you. And where do you get your insights? Where do you find your calm? And how do you create your own accountability for giving to others, and not just necessarily a management posture, but true coaching? And if I were to characterize how leaders that I've known that have evolved, they at some point have slayed their dragons, meaning they have achieved a lot in their career. And it's not necessarily always about moving up into the next job. I like to think about a career like a career quilt. It's like pulling different experiences into your life in such a way so that your life becomes richer because of it. And for me, I've slayed a couple dragons, worked for some big companies and some small companies, and shipped a lot of widgets and driven a lot of traffic.
Yeah,
And, even having the satisfaction of starting two of my own companies that we sold to larger companies. And in that effectiveness, in that someone might call success, you kind of reflect back and say, well, what is it taking from me to achieve these things? And what am I getting from it? And
yeah,
what can I give to others? And so I would say this leg of the stool, which represented giving to the next generation, started off as managing early in my career, where I started to manage others and shape their careers. And I'm very proud of that. But there is some bias in managing someone because it's all in the context of the organization.
yeah,
Secondly, in that, I had the chance to sponsor certain projects. And sponsoring a project as a design leader would mean that you'd go into an organization or like a school, and you'd sponsor like a whole class. And I've done this for undergraduates or graduates, and it's really rewarding to be able to uh, have your organization sponsor a project of students. In fact, some of these over the years have actually translated to great relationships, and I've helped either place some of those designers or
yeah,
find them the right jobs because I saw something in them when they were in school. And that's been from the Rhode Island School of Design to SVA to even Stanford D School. I love, mentoring and coaching in that context. And I saw it as an honor.
yeah,
But when I discovered coaching, really coaching, I got certified. I learned this from this group. We call it like a salon style discussion.
yeah,
And this really had me lean in to say, would I be good at this? And what's unique about a coaching relationship is that you really pour into the individual and you look at them from a standpoint of how can you optimize and how can they optimize to be their best selves. And you look at things that might be keeping them from being their best selves. And yet you're not their manager, you're not their co-founder, you're not
Yeah.
on their board. And I have had the privilege to advise, founders and designers at all levels, really focusing on transitions. And I have had a lot of transitions in my life.
Yeah.
These could be life transitions, they could be promotions, they could be moving out of a job, moving into a job. Reorgs is also a very
Very relevant. Yeah.
very relevant topic.
Yeah.
And so I find that a way that I can give back, but also holds me accountable of being a great leader is to pour into these individuals. So this is one significant leg of the stool
Yeah.
that has been really rewarding for me. And coaching's not for everyone, but I think from the standpoint of giving back, and some leaders teach, in their latter years,
Yeah.
some speak, some actually share their knowledge on podcasts like this. But I think
Yeah.
what balance is an important leg is just to think about like what is the type of activity that would create balance and accountability as you're gaining wisdom in the industry.
Yeah.
So that's the first leg.
Yeah. 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 No, look, I think I really resonate with a lot of things that you said there. I really love the stories about obviously coaching at grad school and schools, and helping actually find roles or helping them place designers in there, because I think there's such a distinct lack of support and just general opportunity for juniors coming through the ranks, especially in today's job market. I think it's no secret that it's forever become more difficult as a junior, especially with plenty of roles that require many years of experience in the industry already. It's very difficult. So yeah, look, hats off to you for obviously doing that and supporting that. I wanted to ask you a question, Dane, about the difference between, you're mentioning obviously different relationships that you get to build when you coach and mentor people, maybe perhaps outside of your organization. So how do you determine, or how do you differentiate the relationships you build with someone internally that you're managing and coaching in your own team versus someone outside the organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for someone who's being coached, they need, of course, someone that is pouring into their lives that is different. So if you think about a significant other, if you think about a boss, if you
Yeah.
think about your team members, you think about your board, if that's the case,
Yeah.
these are all, in a way, types of individuals that can pour into someone in a certain way, but there's always bias that's introduced because of the relationship. And so I mentioned the difference of managing someone. You've got the bias of wanting to retain them, wanting them to do well in
Yeah,
terms
of
of
course. Yeah.
performance. You want them to do well in terms of the performance of the organization. And of course, you want ultimately the relationship to be good and to keep them in the organization and have that be a great experience. But it's always in the context of managing slash mentoring or coaching them inside the context of the organization.
Yeah.
When I have a chance to speak to, let's say, a founder, I'm not a board member. And what I've learned from other leaders is that it's lonely at the top. There's very few relationships where there is someone pouring into you that creates a trusted relationship that you can see them and you are 100% vested in their improvement, their excellence.
Yeah.
And you have a unique perspective as a coach to be able, and an advisor, to really focus on that individual. And so I just, once I discovered that, because I've had some coaching in my life and it's liberating, it's freeing, because they can pour 100% into you and they can see things in you that need to provoke honesty, need
Yeah.
to provoke um, performance. And you can also dig into the things that are potentially getting in their way of their progress that they don't see
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it just reiterates what we said earlier, Dane. I think at any level it's important that you understand where you're at and where you could potentially improve. And as you said, when you get to the top of founders, directors, whoever it might be, who perhaps are at the top or latter ends of their career, there's still plenty of things that they can work on and improve upon potentially. And yeah, as you said, not too many people around them in their business, perhaps, or perhaps of the board, or the investors who are investing in their company. Of course, their motives are different to making this person as best as they possibly can. It's obviously much more towards making a success out of their business. And those two perhaps don't align all the time, right? So yeah, it's really obviously a really interesting topic, and it's great to know a little bit more about the differences between internal employees that you may have managed and obviously external. It's that 100% focus area, and being able to really dig deeper into how to get the best out of them. So Dane, what would you describe as the second leg to your stool?
Yeah. So if teaching and coaching and advising and mentoring is an output, I think an input I would characterize as creating. And when I speak to other design leaders, there's something about them that's somehow always connected to the arts. Their gift might be writing, and their gift might be literally creating visual arts. It might be in the performance of words that are connected to music. But I have found that this second leg of the stool is imperative, and it has to do with finding balance in the parts of the job where you, as a leader, have in some degree always abstracted yourself from the craft. At some point, it's very difficult for you to actually be uh, as you said, pushing pixels and connecting to creating. Actually, there's science behind what that does in the brain,
Yeah,
how it connects certain synapses in the brain. And I see this as an important, not only balance of your life to feel satisfied with a creation act. And it's not that you have to do anything with it. I was really inspired in November 2022 when I was on holiday, and we were down in Florida in a really amazing community where there's a lot of artists. And I decided to go on a gallery tour. And it turns out the gallery and the studios are within arm's reach of each other. And just through talking with different artists in that particular afternoon, it all led me to this one artist that was highly respected, but also an extraordinary person. And someone had given him a heads up call and said, "Hey, Dane, this guy seems like an interesting guy. Would you mind if he stopped by?" He's like, "Yeah, have him come by." So I'm meeting this artist named Doug Fultz for the first time, and he sits me down in his studio, and he's there with his dog. And for the first time he's meeting me, he sits down with me for like 2 hours, and he just tells me about his life. He tells me about how he
yeah,
used to be an old ad executive, and he told me about his transition into becoming an artist. And he sat down and said there was a transition that I needed to make. And it was a life transition about how I would move from this posture of being an ad executive into leaning into being more of a creator. And that fascinated me. And I took that experience and I said, I am going to challenge myself. At one point, I'll be less of a design leader and more of a creator.
yeah,
And what would that look like? And so I created a 10-year plan. I set up the studio in early 2023, and Dane Howard Studio now exists. It's we run several projects through it. It started off with the humble posture of creating different works, and I build different audiences. I've gotten into AI, and it's led to some extraordinary things. So just because I opened that door to creativity,
yeah,
it allowed me to create a body of work that then shifted the polarity so that I could use that not only in my day job, so it gives back in so many ways,
yeah,
uh, but it gives me a foundation to speak more openly about creativity. Like one of the big assignments I gave myself was artificial intelligence and how to create and navigate the guardrails around
yeah,
AI, both visually. And so I created several projects around different AI workflows. I knew that we were at an important part in history where creation needed to collide with AI, and I needed to become much more of an expert in it. So this idea of running interesting projects through the studio enriched my life in ways I can't even tell you. And that
Yeah.
second part of the stool became imperative. And so I brought that back to my salon group, and they said, "Well, I'm writing a book." And there was two other design leaders that were actively building shows based on their painting and their work. And they were exhibiting and they were contributing to communities and doing sculpture. And I thought, this is rich. There's something here that is worth talking about, that's worth listening to, and certainly a part of a heritage of, if leg one is coaching and mentoring, leg two has to do about creating and touching work in a way that enriches your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, absolutely love that story about, going to Florida and meeting the artist, going on the gallery tour. I think it's so important that everyone that's listening to this, really understands that concept, because I think design always came from a creative space, and I think it's very much now shifting towards a very business oriented minded craft, if you like, if you can even use the word craft anymore. But I think especially in design leadership, I think there are a lot of conversations that I've certainly had recently with design leaders who may have been laid off recently or may be open to something new, maybe looking for their next venture. And I've heard a lot of them say, I'd love to get closer, back closer to the craft or back closer to the creative side of the design. But some of them fear it's too late for them. But using something like you've just that prime example, Dane, perhaps it's not in your immediate job, in your immediate life, in that aspect, but there's plenty of other ways you could do it. You've obviously proven it with the studio you've created now. Go and invest time, put yourself into something new that is creative and get that part of your brain going again. And it can obviously help much more in day-to-day life at work, but also outside of work as well, which I think is super important. And I think that can give design leaders who are seeking that bit more of creative parts of their life back, that they may not be able to get with their job right now. So yeah, super useful information, Dane. Thanks for that. So yeah, leads us on to the third part of your stall, Dane. Where does that come from?
Yeah. So I think anyone who has a full-time gig um, will relate to the fact that they will take as much of you as you give them. And I've learned this the hard way. And this is really where you give so much of yourself into a job, and you try to creatively create aspects of the job that are giving to you. And uh, I think as a design leader, uh, to be able to allocate a certain amount of mind share to the organization, to uh, the product, to the research, uh, quickly fills up a lot of your time and space. And so uh, when I put the full time job into the context, it's more about saying this is going to be a prominent leg of the stool. There's no question about it. And in fact, when I was, if you put it into the context of like a unicycle, there's only one leg of that stool.
Yeah,
It's so easy to try to hold that balance over time. And I think if you think about the rate of erosion, or you called it earlier burnout, uh, it's much more probable. And you will also find this longing for something that you're
yeah,
trying to put your finger on
yeah,
when you put 100% of yourself into the job. Now, that sounds a little bit antiquated when you say it, because the headline isn't, no, don't put 100% of yourself into your job.
yeah,
But I think in the context of holistic life, I mean, uh, I know people who have gotten re in touch with sleep, re in touch with eating well, re in touch with
yeah,
in nutrition. And of course, that is the hallmarks of a balanced life as well. But I think in terms of a lot of what that leg of the stool does, it sharpens you, makes you a better leader. But if you give all of yourself to it and don't create balance in some of the other ways I described, you won't be a sustainable better leader,
Yeah.
because your rate of erosion will be there. Your longing for what your job is not giving you will be
Yeah.
there. And you'll find yourself probably wandering and churning out of that role quicker, um, and less engaged. And so I think from from the hallmark and standpoint of how do you create a more sustainable, interesting uh, problem solver, and I frame it as problem solving. So not only do we have to be curious as leaders, but we also are presented with lots of problems. The problems that we solve are critical to look at things in new ways. And in fact, uh, when I speak with other leaders, oftentimes it's the bridging of something else in their life or an experience that they've had that has provided a really interesting insight to look at a problem differently. And so that allows a leader to reach into these other parts of their life or other parts of the legs
Yeah.
of the stool so that they feel more sustainable and more balanced to do the day job.
Yeah. Yeah. I think not letting your job define you is where what I'm sort of getting from you, Dane. It's an aspect of life, and I think there are people that really do throw absolutely everything into it. But as you said, I think it can be counterproductive at certain points. And if you don't have the other two legs of the stool that you mentioned, it does become a point where you feel, am I getting everything out of this job? Do I need to look for something new? And it does become, just seeking something that perhaps doesn't exist, or you may not know exists, if you were just to allow yourself to throw yourself into other parts of life as well. Yeah, as we said, I think there was a huge problem and has been a huge problem of burnout since COVID. I think particularly, not exclusively, but I think particularly in startup life, I think founding members of teams I think there's always been a consensus within startups to want to be the person that works 22 out of the 24 hours of the day, and things like that. Which, if you want to do that, great. But I think to get the best out of yourself, you have to maintain a healthy lifestyle outside of that. And obviously, working 22 hours, I wouldn't say was a healthy lifestyle. Sometimes it may have to be done, but yeah, as you said, it's about balancing your life, focusing on other things. I'm interested to know then what you personally did. How you found balance. What have you been focusing on? Obviously, you've got your studio, which sounds like certainly one aspect of it. What else did you personally look into or focus on when you sort of had this realization that you needed to?
Yeah. Well, if I go back to the coaching and the teaching, is one, it creates a lot of accountability for yourself. You really have to
Yeah.
raise your understanding in such a way because you're accountable for someone else's learning. But at the same time, you're learning from them. So this insight came from actually coaching founders and realizing that what they're bringing to the table is the fact that they were over indexed on too much focus. They felt that this their whole company was based on the progress of them and that they were imbalanced. And so this insight comes from the very fact that I had invested in coaching to
Yeah.
learn this really from them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and which in fact required me to kind of coach them back. And so that accountability and that reflecting back, I learned from my clients all the time. And I heard this in my salon. I heard this from other coaches, and they're like, this is why this is so important. So I think this is why it just resonated with me now, resonated with me in this topic.
Yeah.
But that's how I really saw those vibrations and those reflections, was in some of these other activities that I was seeing.
Sure. What in terms of your personal life now, is there anything particularly you do, obviously outside of your studio and things? Is there anything else that you do to sort of relax your mind or balance your mind a little bit more?
So I had the great privilege to help design the house that I'm in right now. So we
Yeah, it
had
looks great, by the way.
I had never, we had done some remodels, but I had never tackled the project so large.
Yeah.
And this became a side project and a passion during COVID. when we had a life event. My kids went off to college, and so we were at a stage where we were empty nesters,
Yeah,
and
sure.
we were asking what's keeping us in the Bay Area. We had lived in the Bay Area for like
Yeah.
15 years, and we made the choice to build a house in Tennessee. And during that process, I found just this incredible amount of satisfaction where I could point some of my energy to the house because I was vested in it. Of course, I knew every square inch of this house, but just the fascination of seeing it through a design lens, seeing it through uh, a new problem, a new challenge, ran parallel to my gig, and that was amazing. That's then blossomed into a whole nother types of projects that I run through the studio now, which is pretty fun. I
Yeah.
can now show my home as well as some of the things that I've been able to do with interior designers and architects to help create a sounding board to a completely different perspective. Like I'm a design leader in tech industry with an aesthetic for modern farmhouses. So
Yeah. Yeah.
but somehow that resonates. So I get to have new conversations. So this grows me and expands me in new ways. So I think that to me is just one example. Others are colliding with some nonprofits. I get to do some great
Yeah.
advisory work for um, uh, for some nonprofits, and I'm learning about uh, soccer. I'm reconnecting with MLS and the
Yeah.
Premier League. They get to do some great work. There's a great organization called Black Players for Change, and I just feel blessed that I get to go alongside that executive director and coach
Yeah.
him as well as do some meaningful work for their organization. So these are life giving. The fact that I have reserved some of these parking spots in my life to be able to do that, uh, but I can also use what I'm learning from them to bridge into my day job. And
Yeah.
that is just so important. And again, like just like when I started with the analogy of the three-legged stool, when you're designing products and you put your customer in the center of that stool and you're just trying tirelessly to ship great balanced experiences, the customer feels it when it's imbalanced.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you're always having to make adjustments. And I think the analogy also works for yourself, and to be able to say, well, if I'm in the center of the stool, do I feel balanced, and do I feel that I am doing a series of life giving and also giving back and doing things that allow me to sharpen my saw in such a way so that I can show up and be the best person I can be, as I show up for this job.
Yeah.
And I don't deplete myself, and I don't uh in a way waver when things get hard, and just try to reduce that rate of erosion, I think, is
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah. No, thanks very much for all the info, Dane. Really appreciate it, and I hope everyone that's listening to this learned something from it. Um, Dane, I just wanted to ask you one last question before we end. Now, I'm going to be asking every guest on this podcast this. It's not necessarily going to be relevant to everyone's topics, of course, but it's a question that I think will definitely give off a lot of different answers. But I wanted to ask you, look, obviously in a perfect world where you had unlimited time, potentially budget, resources, I wanted to know what the idyllic or perfect design team would look like to you and why.
Mm. So recently, I brought forward uh, this really great spider diagram of competencies, and there are so many both hard skills and soft skills that are being asked of designers. And the shape of a designer, when they map their competencies to their career, um, create these remarkable shapes. And when you overlay individuals and you create a team, what you're looking for again is balance. And so I love teams that have this overlapping balance between prototyping and ethnography and empathy and business knowledge and technical knowledge and presentation skills, as well as collaboration. And when you overlap high functioning teams where their competencies help each other, they train each other and they make each other stronger. So I think that is a hallmark of, groups of 5, 7, 9. And then I love looking and being inspired by telling stories and making stories. So I've always been the one that looks at the behind the scenes and how they make a movie or how they document things. And what's really astounded me is that most of the work that we do as design leaders create an era of product success. But there's also runs alongside it is culture success or culture change, culture effectiveness. And we rarely point a camera on telling that story. So I think part one would be, how might I create a really well balanced team of telling great stories and doing great work? But I would also, you said, budget, time, and resources. I would also hire a small documentary artist team. And these individuals would be responsible for telling the story of why we're doing and what we're doing. And when I've had the chance to do that, they literally create like short documentaries of making the product and making the area, and you point that back to the organization first, and then those stories also sometimes get to be seen externally. And when a leader commits to telling the story, the behind the scenes, and
Yeah.
makes a commitment to documenting what you're doing and why, it creates these incredible resonance of a story and an era for that design leader. And so uh, I always don't have the luxury to be able to do that. When I have, I've been so glad I've been able to do that.
Yeah.
And so that would be my perfect team, is that it would be a tight team that had balanced competencies that would train each other and move forward together and teach each other at the same time that we had a well-intended set of storytellers documenting the impact and the story as we go along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an amazing take on it, to be honest, Dane. And yeah, I think it's a great way to track progress, but also to potentially remotivate people that may have lost that motivation, to see where they've come from to where they are now and why they're doing what they're doing. And also to inspire others, right? Inspire other parts of the business, inspire potential users. If you're gonna send these stories externally, or shape them in a way that can be used externally as well. It's how the users can understand what you're doing, what's gone into it, why you're doing it, and yeah, hopefully that will create a better product in the end, in the long run. But no, look, Dane, obviously really appreciate your time. It's amazing having you on. Thanks very much for featuring on the first episode of this new podcast. We have got your good friend on, Bob Baxley, next week. So yeah, looking forward to speaking to him. Dane, just before I let you go, I know that you are, just for anyone listening, obviously everyone knows the job market is a little bit tough at the moment. You've got a couple positions open, right, at G2 at the moment?
Yeah, G2, think of G2 as a marketplace for SaaS software.
Yeah,
So it's a trusted place. And there's a buyer side and a seller side. And we're in a season of really building out the craft of the team. So we've got senior designer and principal designer positions
sure.
open currently. And we're in kind of a safe growth mode right now. And there's also a team we're building in India as well. So excited to be able to add 2 more designers
Yeah,
to our India team as well. So excited about that. So
yeah.
thanks for asking.
No, absolutely. And yeah, look, obviously just for anyone listening, if you're interested in applying, of course, you know where to look. Dane is obviously on LinkedIn. I'll be tagging Dane in the posts that come out for the podcasts. But yeah, Dane, once more, thanks very much for your time. And we'll speak soon.
Great pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.